I heard the other day in the news taught a bunch of awful criminals in Russian jails would be pardoned in exchange for their participation in the Ukraine war. In truth, Putin recruited these detainees and dispatched them to the fight through the Wagner Group, a private mercenary outfit. He offered to pardon them and send them home if they returned alive. More than 5,000 convicts escaped the remainder of their prison sentences this way in March. They also included some of the most heinous murders. Surprisingly, one of Russia's most heinous serial killers has begged us to let him become one of these mercenaries. Mikhail Popkov is his given name. He is currently imprisoned at the Black Dolphin prison. This institution is infamous for being one of the world's most horrific prisons, the kind of place where you go in and never come out alive. Mikhail would sooner die in the battlefield than be imprisoned in this facility. Meanwhile, the news that this serial killer would be pardoned shocked Russian public opinion. Because this is a really dangerous man who should never be released into the public eye again. And learning about his previous occupation is extremely surprising. As of 2023, he had confessed to 83 murders. And that only includes female victims. That's nearly genocidal, and he's only been in prison since 2015, confessing to one every time he can remember. As a result, the true number of victims is thought to be significantly greater. So, which murders did he carry out? The date was October 29, 1998. A heinous murder has been reported in the southeastern Siberian town of Angarsk. Tatiana, 20, and her companion Yulia were on their way home from a concert after a night of fun and mild drinking. They are discovered dead the next day. They'd been dumped in the middle of a forest. A shepherd walking through the forest discovered them and alerted the police. The bodies were in a dreadful state. Their faces were undamaged, but the backs of their heads were split open, exposing their skulls. The killer seems to have struck her in the back of the head hard enough to knock her out. There were also multiple marks on her body from being hit with an axe. Yulia, another of her friends, had several stab wounds in her face and torso. When they were discovered, they were both naked, and a genital examination revealed symptoms of sexual abuse. In other words, the previous murderer attacked and sexually raped these two women on their way home. Angarsk was all over the news once these killings were revealed. Because this was not the first murder of its kind in the area. In reality, the bodies of numerous women were discovered as early as 1992, 6 years ago. The authorities were never able to solve any of the crimes, and Tatiana and Ethia's cases remain unresolved. When the bodies of the ladies were discovered in Angarsk in 1992, residents thought, "This is not human, this is wolf." This is because the victims were discovered in Angarsk. This is due to the body's grotesque shape, which was discovered deep in the forest and in a cemetery in the town of Angarsk. During autopsies, the bodies were discovered to have numerous stab wounds, particularly axe marks, which led to the identification of a serial killer. The problem is that between 1992 and 2010, when the first serial homicide occurred, a total of 24 other women were murdered in a similar manner. This is more than one every year. The assassin, dubbed the Demon of Angarsk, was ruthless in his techniques. The remains had been mangled, with one having up to 180 stab wounds all over it. One body's heart was even pulled out. The bodies were discovered dismembered in certain circumstances. What was even more frustrating was that cops couldn't always catch the killer. As a result, the serial killings just continued happening. So here we are, 18 years later, in 2012. The killer's profile began to emerge on the 20th anniversary of the murders. Mikhail Popkov was his given name. He was a retired police officer who was 54 years old. A police officer in charge of the local population's safety. What makes it even more startling is that he was part in a serial killer investigation. Mikhail was a caring husband and parent most of the time. He was married to Elena, another police officer, and the couple had a daughter. They were both officers of the law. He appeared to be maintaining society and supporting his family. But then he discovers his wife's adultery, which appears to be the cause for a series of indiscriminate female murders. Of course, his mother was an alcoholic when he was a child, and he was regularly abused by her. So he feared his mother more than he loved her, which is why he preferentially targeted women who were intoxicated during his murdering spree, which is also assumed to be related to his mother's tragedy. He was a police officer monitoring the neighborhood when the first murder happened in 1992. On the street, he noticed two inebriated women. He approached them and said, "It's late at night and it's dangerous, let me take you home." They had no idea he was a police officer. So the women got in the car, and he was on his way to the other woman's house after dropping one of them off at home. She approached the subject of her marriage in this fairly awkward circumstance. "My husband and I have been having a bit of a falling out lately," she said wistfully, and Michael's thoughts quickly returned to his own wife's affair. "I'm certain Elena would have done the same." He then pulls over and says, "I need to get something," before snatching a bottle from the backseat and repeatedly beating the woman in the head. The attack came on too quickly. She collapses, and his wrath explodes into sexual assault and murder. It was the start of a long killing spree. He buried the body in a remote spot where it was never recovered. The women would be reported as missing or willingly runaways. He was the most knowledgeable about the procedure. Instead of guilt, he was filled with confidence. Being a cop seems to be the ideal career for getting away with murder. And the murderous spree went on. As he drove about town in his police car, he was more concerned with identifying the proper target than with protecting the citizens. "I began to notice inebriated women leaving bars and clubs late at night. It was really simple to get them into a car. And once they were in the car, it was simple to ambush them, because the victims were vulnerable. Because they were utilizing police cars, the murders might go on for years without being discovered." He had the benefit of being a police officer himself and being able to tamper with the evidence if there was any. That's what sent the investigation off track. He then unexpectedly left the police department in 1998 to work as a security guard for an oil firm. He also worked as a taxi driver on the side. However, when he left, he claimed to have misplaced his police identification and never returned it. And he kept committing crimes while using this police ID. Then came 1999. He killed someone he knew this time, his daughter's music teacher. The victim was less alert and an easy target due to the familiarity of the face. But now comes the truly surprising part. When his daughter learned of his death, she became so distraught that she began soliciting funds for his funeral. Michael offered her money out of the goodness of his heart at this moment to console her. He didn't feel the least bit bad. The murder spree lasted until 2010. I'm curious how he was never named as a suspect during all of this time. Being a former cop may have made it simpler for him to stay under the radar. Then, in 2010, everything changed. A detective is reviewing all of these serial crimes, looking into them more thoroughly, and comes across two important pieces of evidence. That's when the probe gets serious. The first was a common set of tire tracks found around trash sites, which they researched and discovered to be the tire tracks of a Russian Jeep. At the time, this was a type of vehicle employed as a police car in Russia. The second was sperm from the bodies of the victims. At the time, sperm alone was insufficient to carry the inquiry further, but as forensic science advanced and the first evidence led us to think that the killer was a police officer, we collected a tremendous amount of DNA from current and retired local cops. They numbered 3,500 in total. Finally, the DNA of Mikhail Popkov, a former police officer, was found to be an exact match to the killer's sperm. Even the cops were taken aback by the outcomes. Mikhail Popkov is finally apprehended by police in June 2012. It's now time to expose how bad the police investigation was. Clearly, there were previous opportunities to catch Michael. Stella, a 15-year-old girl, was discovered naked in a woodland near Angarsk in 1998. She was amazingly alive despite the fact that temperature was below freezing. After being treated at a hospital, the child testified against her attacker. Stella vividly remembers her assailant. He allegedly put her in a car and drove her to the woods. He smacked her head against a tree, and she claims she blacked out and has no memory of what happened after that. Stella was certain that the attacker was a police officer, and she even sketched an accurate montage. At the time, investigators suspected Michael as well. But then Elena, Michael's wife and another police officer, arrived. Elena's testimony served as a protection. It confirmed her bogus alibi that she was at home with her husband during the crime. The investigators all believed her, and the case was closed. Elena later admitted that she had no idea her spouse was a serial killer. Michael maintained his murdering spree until 2010, free of all suspicion because he was such a kind husband. Nothing could stand in his way. However, I stated that he was arrested in 2012. In fact, between 2010 and 2012, he would be incubating for about 2 years. We subsequently discover that he caught syphilis from one of his victims, which is why he had erectile difficulties. He claimed that it robbed him of his health and his urge to kill. With all of this disclosed, he went on trial in 2015 and was sentenced to life in jail. The truly odd aspect of the case is that he argued that his crimes were justified during the trial. He claimed he was doing it to teach the women a lesson. His version was that the women had left their husbands and children at home to go drinking, and that they deserved it. Because they were inebriated and wandering around late at night. He claims he wanted to punish and teach these women a lesson. That doesn't make much sense. What other reason would a 15-year-old girl attack? It was a heinous crime that could never be justified. I assumed that a life sentence on 24 counts would be the end of the matter. However, while in prison in 2017, he admitted to murdering another group of females. That amounts to an additional 59 killings. There was a rush to investigate based on his confession. Only 56 of the murders were determined to be plausible, and he found himself back in court. He is sentenced to life in prison for the second time. He is the first criminal in Russian history to be sentenced to 2 life terms. But that's not the end of the story. He confesses to 2 more killings 3 years later. He has been convicted of 82 murders in total. Of course, they were allowed only because there was sufficient evidence and confessions. It's easy to see why this man was dubbed Russia's worst killer. He does, however, appear to enjoy the moniker. He was interviewed by a media outlet, and he showed neither regret for his crimes or concern for his victims' suffering. Instead, he constantly says, "I killed immoral women and prostitutes to clean up the streets." The additional sentence was rendered useless at trial. He had already received 2 life sentences, and since the death penalty was abolished in Russia in 1996, there is no heavier penalty than life imprisonment. Finally, Russian authorities ordered Mikhail Popkov's imprisonment in the Black Dolphin prison, a hellhole from which he would never emerge alive. I'm sure you're familiar with the Black Dolphin prison, so I won't go into detail about it. It is a place where human rights are completely ignored. Only the worst of the worst criminals are housed there. As a result, it is an environment where basic human needs, such as eating and sleep, are entirely managed. As a result, they are unable to sleep or eat adequately. The prison's mission is to provide inmates with basic life support. After that, in January 2023, Mikhail does a TV interview in which he expresses his desire to join the Ukrainian war as a result of the extraordinary amnesty. In fact, 40,000 offenders took advantage of the offer at the time, and he joined Wagner's group as a mercenary. By the way, I read on the news that at the time, they honored and preferred felonious felons as combat heroes. That is difficult for me to grasp. It is still unknown whether Mikhail Popkov took part in the Ukrainian war. He would be pardoned if he did not perish in the fight and returned. Will the people of Russia accept this? Because the Russian government controls the media, the typical Russian may never know. Mikhail Popkov, the Angarsk serial killer who killed at least 82 innocent people, thought he would get what he deserved for his crimes, but in the face of war, justice is thrown out the window. It's just a shame. So many ladies were slaughtered by one subhuman human being. The issue is that there may be further victims in the future. What are your opinions? Please share your ideas in the comments section. Thank you very much.